What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we have some Destiny 2 news and updates regarding the game. And so initially, Bungie have pushed fixes for a bunch of different bugs and issues in Season of the Haunted, so we'll talk about some of those. And today we also get a sneaky preview of a new Solstice weapon for the event in 2022. Plus we'll touch on broken weapons, an exotic which is doing more damage than intended. And then Bungie talk Rift and Iron Banner, where there's a lot of feedback. Plus we'll cover some weekly story beats and plenty more inside of the video. So as always guys, I hope you enjoy this one, and without further delay, let's get into it. And starting out today, something to bear in mind, Bungie Help said, we've resolved an issue where Pinnacle gear was dropping more than once per week in the master version of the Duality dungeon, and starting today, Pinnacle gear will drop once per week per character in the master dungeon, and repeated clears will drop powerful gear. And so last week people were farming the master dungeon, as every single encounter would infinitely give Pinnacle drops on completion. There was some confusion as to whether that was intended, but as we can see, Bungie have now fixed it. Next though, let's speak about the Iron Banner and the return of Rift. Initially on that subject, Bungie Help said that they're investigating an issue where players will sometimes spawn repeatedly between rounds during Iron Banner matches. And on top of bugs and issues there's a lot of feedback about the Rift game mode. Very long respawn timers, the number of maps in the rotation, and general gameplay quality, so give us your thoughts down below. It's not something I've spent a massive amount of time in just yet. DMG added though that Rift has been live for just a few hours. We've a lot of feedback to run through and data to watch, and we'll likely have a recap on how things went and what our plans are for future changes once the dust settles. And so it's certainly worth forwarding that feedback to Bungie. But here, related to Season of the Haunted content, Destiny 2 tweeted that Guardians have contained nearly 17 million nightmares on Leviathan. Once reaching 20 million, the final solar fragments will become available. And so we are waiting on 4 of those solar fragments to be released. And we're probably less than 3 million nightmares away from Bungie updating that, so it seems reasonably likely that by the weekend, we'll start to get access to those additional solar fragments. Next though, we have some patch note changes for Hotfix 4101. This arrived in the game on Tuesday's reset, and for dungeons and raids, they fixed issues in Duality where players were spawning in undesirable locations after joining existing fire teams. And they also say that standard bearers are now spawning where intended, plus spamming the bell should no longer stop it from functioning, and they fixed numerous textures and environment issues. They also fixed encounter progress problems with Grasp, and missing previews of Vowed Disciple weapons. Then for gameplay and investment and weapons, they say players will be less likely to spawn into the opposing team's Witherhoard pools inside of PvP. On top of this, the Bump in the Night rocket launcher from the containment now has a tracking indicator in the scope when used with the tracking module perk, and they fixed several hand cannons that had missing scopes, including the Steady Hand and True Prophecy. Plus there are a couple of technical fixes right there. Moving on though, we get a bit of a preview of some Solstice 2022 stuff. And so as always, a spoiler alert is necessary right here. But Entity on Twitter shared some images of the rewards for the event, and while we can't see all of the stats and things like that, it does confirm that we're going to see a Solstice weapon for the event in the form of a hand cannon. I believe right there that's a Better Devils True Prophecy style kind of model for the hand cannon, but obviously with this Solstice artwork on it, so it'll be interesting to see how good that one is, especially looking back at Guardian Games, we got a lot of weapon drops inside of the event. And then there are also images of various different ghost shells, sparrows and cosmetics. And there are some pretty bizarre ones like the seashell shell, as well as a crab sparrow right there. But of course we are a good few weeks out from the event this year, so we'll get more information in the future, but give us your thoughts on those below. And then here, it's worth a quick recap from this week's story. And spoiler alert, one of the notable big picture things moving forward is that perhaps Crow fancies himself as a bit of a hunter Vanguard in the future. And here was his commentary from the end of this week's quest.
Second chances. Turns out I've been using mine wrong. I thought being a guardian was my destiny, that wielding the light for good was the most I had to offer. But it's clear now. This is what the Traveler chose me for. I was reforged in the light for a purpose, to remake something dead and gone into something beautiful. To learn how to forge something new from what we were. Everything Uldren did to the reef, the scorn, Fikrul, I have a responsibility. No. A calling to make them whole. And I can't replace Cade. But I can cover his old patrols. Maybe organize the hunters a bit, if they'll let me. Clean up some of my mess. I don't know if I can fix everything Uldren left broken. But I can try.
Next though, a quick mention for a dungeon loot table, and this was shared by Nemu the Great, who's done the graphic right here, and the final encounter can drop essentially anything from the dungeon, so it's worth bearing in mind if you're after specific weapons like Storm Chaser, which we can see will drop from the second encounter. It's possibly worth farming the other encounters it drops from, as of course they have smaller loot pools than the final boss encounter. But basically, for the Sorrowbearer encounter, the first one, the Epicurean Fusion Rifle and Lingering Dread Grenade Launcher are the featured weapons, with helmets, arms, and leg drops. Then in the second encounter, which is the Vault, the Unforgiven Submachine Gun, as well as the Storm Chaser Linear Fusion Rifle are the featured weapons, plus arms, chest, and class item armor drops. Then as we can see, for the third and final encounter, all 4 of the new unique weapons will drop, as well as the 2 reprised opulence weapons, Epicurean and Fixed Odds, and then the exotic sword, Heart Shadow. Plus any of the armor pieces can drop here as well, so essentially the entire loot pool has the chance to drop on that final encounter. And I thought that could be useful for any of you guys who want to know the specific drop sources. Another quick mention here, and something that Bungie haven't touched on just yet, but currently players have figured out that Anarchy is doing 5 times the bonus damage that it should be dealing to some enemies, and so it's a weird one. This erroneous amount of damage doesn't appear to work on most of the bosses in the game, which of course is unfortunate. It also doesn't work on the majority of enemies in the new dungeon, but it is randomly ticking way more damage than intended on a lot of enemies in the game, primarily sort of tanky mid-tier enemies, but even some champions and Lost Sector bosses as well. You can see right here, Anarchy is absolutely chewing through these Legend Lost Sector enemies. Certainly doing more damage than it does on average there, so definitely something else to bear in mind and potentially play around with, as it doesn't require any other mods or setting up, although we can expect Bungie to adjust this at some point in the future. Another thing that players have been discussing are the resilience changes Bungie brought in this season, and it pretty much becomes the most important armor stat in the game as it's offering very high levels of damage reduction. According to Paul Tassi of Forbes, starting from tier 7 resilience, you get 20% damage reduction, tier 8 would see 26% and tier 9 32%, but tier 10 will see 40% damage reduction, which is basically the equivalent of having something like the Protective Light bonus on at all times. And so in particular for hard PvE content, maxed out resilience is going to be a very good option, and probably more or less the meta, at least if it stays this way for PvE content that is very difficult. So I think that's another worthwhile mention right there. And for today guys, that is everything that we have to round up in the video. So as always, I hope you guys have enjoyed this one and found it interesting. Give us your thoughts on any of the stuff we've spoken about down in the comment section. Plus, a like rating down below really does help us out if you're new to the channel. Otherwise though, as always, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.